Well, kia ora everyone, and first of all, my apologies for not being able to be there with all of you for this very, very important kaupapa. Circumstances beyond my control have taken me out of the country, where I have been joining my Aboriginal brothers and sisters and elders in a community called Kempsey, which is just out of Port Macquarie in New South Wales for a corroboree. I really did want to be there with you today, but I felt that it was still important to send a video message to all of you and obviously catch up with everybody on my return home. First of all, I think it's really important to indicate why I'm so passionate about suicide prevention and mental health. I've been also lucky and very fortunate to walk in a number of worlds. I came to the world of suicide prevention and mental health not by desire, certainly by chance. My very best friend had taken his life, and more than 8 years ago now, I was in search of the perennial answer to the question that many of us ask. Why did he do what he did? What led him to make the ultimate decision around taking his own life? And 8 years later, I'm still no closer to that answer specifically in relation to my best mate. But what I am clearer on now is what has gone on within the system and what needs to change and where we need to head, both as a nation and also as a people. For these last 8 years, I've been a member of the board of Suicide Prevention Australia, that nation's peak body, where we have been working with members and organisations right across that country in respect of both bringing the suicide rate down and trying to institute systems reform wherever we see the opportunity. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. More latterly, I've been chair of the National Coalition for Suicide Prevention in Australia, and more recently I have been the chair of the board of Suicide Prevention Australia as well. So I get a real insight into what's going on both at a local community level and also at a national, a state and a territory level. For the last 4 years I have been on a journey back home in our own country to also see what's been going on with suicide prevention and mental health as well. And I have to say, 4 years ago when I began that journey with my good friend Mike King, I hadn't realised just how bad things were. A lot of people make the assumption overseas that the New Zealand system and the New Zealand model is something to be thankful for, something to go to, something to learn from. But in all reality, when you peer beneath the covers, you find a significant number of things that are wrong. And while we can focus on the things that are wrong, we should focus on the things that are wrong and the solutions around how we can achieve success when it comes to both bringing the rate of suicide down and also more adequately caring for those amongst us who are suffering from mental health conditions. But also, it's the daily struggles of life. So I want to share some lessons with all of you around some of the things that I have learned in that journey and where I propose that we need to consider going into the future as Maori people. Not as Pākehā, not as non-Māori, not as anybody else, but specifically on a journey towards Maori health and well-being. The first lesson I have learnt over all of these years is that it's not all about mental health. A lot of the struggles that people face today are around the general struggle of life. The breakdown in relationships, the loss of a job or an economic opportunity, the failure of a small business. As we age, the challenges that we face with retirement and our later years are upon us. The inability to put kai on the table, to put a roof over the whānau's head. All of these things play into the broader narrative around what we can do to build a better and more sustainable community to support people who are struggling with everyday life. So the first lesson I've learned is that it isn't all about mental health. It is genuinely also about the daily struggle of life and how we can all build resilience to become better people, better communities, and a better nation. The second lesson I've learned is about mental health, and it is about the system. Now, the Mental Health and Addictions Inquiry run by the government or announced by the government when it first came into office has taken any number of submissions and made any number of recommendations. And before Christmas this year, it is true that the New Zealand Māori Council called on those reports to be released post-haste. And that was so we could understand what the voice of our people was telling us in order for us to adequately respond. Because in past years, the problem has always been that the response has been left up to the same people and the same organisations that have presided over essentially a failed system. And in fact, I would argue that Sir Mason Jury, who is an incredible resource and an incredible national treasure for Māori, an incredible taonga, did a wonderful job when it came to the panel and the inquiry. But as New Zealand Māori Council, we wanted to take a closer look at what our people were saying. And in terms of the system, it wasn't just about the failure of the system to deliver for our people. There was a general feeling that the system wasn't built for Māori people. It didn't take into account tikanga. It didn't take into account the way that we as a people do things, the way that we build relationships, the way that our communities work. It didn't take into account the way we roll, the way we talk, the way we support each other, or the way we potentially could support each other. And so what tends to happen is we cast ourselves over towards the Pākehā system and the Pākehā worldview. Well, my message to all of you is if what we were doing was the right way of doing things, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. And so the system itself, the second lesson that I've learned, is it is very broken. The third thing that I've learned is that there is very little investment in the way of capacity building and capability building of Māori organisations to deliver services to Māori people. Now I'm going to remain absolutely fixed on this for just a moment, and it's important that everybody understands that my view, and this is my view, is not just mine, it's shared by many, many across the country, from the very smallest of organisations to the largest of Māori organisations. We have got to put a stop to the number of non-Māori organisations who are really good at winning contracts, but very bad at delivering services to our people. We have got to push back against the number of non-Māori organisations plying their trade in what has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. More importantly, we have got to identify those programs within Māori, and I can tell you, I have seen so many different programs around the country created and developed by our people, run by our people, for our people, and they fail at the last hurdle because they don't get adequate investment to help them grow to scale. And yet here we are, rich with programs and solutions and narratives, if only the investment mix was there. The third and really most important part of this is also another lesson that I've learned, is that we must invest more in research. We must build the Māori evidence base. We must build the Māori research base. We must build, therefore, the Māori workforce to meet the demand that is so obviously already here for us and for our people. So investing in research to create evaluation models and program models, and also not to get involved in this whole ho-ha of co-design for co-design's sake. No, it's not about co-design anymore. It's about Māori designing solutions fit for purpose for Māori communities. And we need to remain focused on that as an outcome. The fourth thing I've learned is that there are a whole lot of service providers out there from government agencies and government departments that don't always talk to each other. And so naturally things slip through the cracks. Because things are slipping through the cracks, because government departments and agencies don't actually talk to each other the way they need to be talking to each other, when it gets to here and here and here and here, well, nobody's really talking to each other. The only ones that talk to each other are Māori organisations within conferences and hui like this to work with each other to try and support each other around narratives. And that's exactly the work that Michael Naira and others have done around the International Declaration on Suicide Prevention for Indigenous and First Nations peoples. The fifth lesson that I've learnt is if we left everything up to the Ministry of Health, then we'd probably all be dead by now. Now I know that sounds like a horrible thing to say, but it is the truth, because it has been the Ministry of Health that has presided over a failure in the system. So they're the lessons that I've learned. So what do we need to do about it? What can we as a people advocate for in terms of change to improve the state of our mental health system for Māori, and also to bring down the suicide rate amongst Māori, which is now one of the highest around the world? The first thing is that we need to be in charge of our own destiny. And my message to government and policymakers is to, yes, we want the pūtea, we need the money to fund what comes next, but we actually need a system of Māori mental health and suicide prevention that's focused on the needs and the demands of our own people in our own communities. And I say to you right now that the first thing we need to do is have a Māori mental health commissioner. A Māori mental health commissioner that can coordinate within our sector, that can support the kaupapa, that can invest in research, that can develop up with our service provider community and our people a evaluation framework and an evidence base to take our services forward. Now, we already have some of it in there already in terms of infrastructure through whānau order and other programs. I said to Pene Henry the other day, wouldn't it be great if we had a whānau order, a national whānau order commissioner and a Māori children's commissioner? You know what? Why don't we have a look at a combination of a national Māori services commission? Why don't we have a look at that as a model? Because through that model we'll be able to better coordinate services, be better able to evaluate programs, be better able to build the evidence base, and also be better able to meet the demand of our people. And that brings me to the second thing that we need to do and need to consider really, really quickly. We need a national Māori workforce development strategy. And I know Te Ray Matatini, I know they've changed their name, but I know Te Ray Matatini has already done a huge amount of work on this front. But here's the thing. We can make it okay for our people to want to reach out for help, to have the conversations, to break down those barriers wherever we see them. But what we also need to do, ladies and gentlemen, whānau, iwi hapu leaders, service providers leaders, community leaders and all the rest of it, is that we need to meet the demand that's already here. We need to create a workforce that is fit for purpose, not just for this year and not just for next year, but the years ahead. And it's not all about tertiary qualified people. It's very much about allied health professionals and support workers and community service workers and so on and so forth. So that's the next thing we need to do out of what's going on. The third thing that we need to do is actually take forward the recommendations of the panel, of the Mental Health and Addictions Inquiry panel, and we now need to start building benchmarks around it. We now need to understand, well, okay, it's one thing to make a recommendation, it's another thing for the government to respond to it. What we now need to do, though, is put everything on the table and say that this is how we benchmark success. Because it's not just about holding ourselves to account for the services that we're providing, it's about holding the government and the government's agencies and departments to account at the same time. So it's 13 minutes in. I don't want to keep up too much more of your time. I know you're all busy. But they are my lessons in terms of what I've learnt and seen around the place over many years. I've been involved in reform for many, many years. And I can tell you that when we have honest conversations about reform of the system and owning the system and governing the system and administering the system, then we will get better outcomes. I just want to say finally that I see amazing and incredible Māori and Māori organisations doing amazing things every day across our communities. Over the last 12 months, I have been into no less than 63 Māori communities. I've attended more than 40 hui around the country in community meetings, and I've had hundreds and hundreds of you contact me about the state of suicide prevention and mental health in New Zealand. All of you have the same message, and all of you come back to a common thread. If only we were in charge. If only we were in control. If only the system was designed by us. And that is the message I bring to your hui today. Let's bring ourselves together. Let's combine our joint voices into a single voice of unity around a kaupapa that is so important to many of us around the country, and ideally many Māori wherever they may be. I'm Matthew Tukaki. I'm passionate about suicide prevention. I'm passionate about mental health, but I'm more passionate about our people. Because from often the outside looking in, you fail to recognise the immense amount of potential, aroha, love, whānau within our Māori community. And I'm here to tell you that it's there. All we have to do is harness the power of our people and our collective selves to make change in this country a reality. Thank you, whānau, and from me to you, I wish you well.